All right, we're going to have a couple call outs this week. First, we want to discuss there have been some recent studies, and there's a recently published study we're looking at now, but then there's also just looking over the last maybe 10 years or so, more information coming out. It's about fluoride consumption, and particularly the idea that in a lot of the country and different parts of the world, there is fluoride added to drinking water, to tap water, and then people consume that and so forth. And so there's been some red flags raised about whether or not this, for when pregnant women consume this, whether it affects brain development and so forth. So what were your reaction? First, I guess we can talk mainly about the study that they are talking about, but obviously we'll have in the show notes the actual article where they reference more materials. But, just kind of what was your reaction to seeing this?
I thought it was interesting. One of the things I took notice with is a small sample size. So I kind of get to question a little bit. You had 229 women studied out of obviously hundreds of millions of women out there who are
in one
pregnant.
county too. Just
in one county.
Yeah.
And the methods for it, but not to jump on it negatively just for that. I think because part of the reason I felt that is I don't know if they were able to use enough to weed out other chemicals that may just be in our environment, right? That could affect these things with pregnancy as well. But I think the bigger thing to me was it's another sign that we have so many artificial chemicals that we have created just as humanity in the last 100 years or so that are just out there. And I know that fluoride is one that was
that's an element. Water. That's something that's been here longer than us.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean by the way we manipulate these things to be a little more concentrated and all that, and the idea that we're learning now about the amount of side effects that these things have on us, and people getting cancer younger, the issues like this of how do fetuses develop around these things, so on and so forth.
It's a good point in the sense that we do so much that everything is so tangled up that it's like, well, hold up, how do we know what anything is from? So
that's what I'm saying. Like, could it be? And a good example, this made me think of, and I'll pass it back, is my youngest kid has type 1 diabetes, and apparently the rate of type 1 diabetes is growing at a certain exponential rate, and they did all the DNA tests on my wife and I, and neither of us have any history of this in our genetic history. And so the doctors were telling us at the time that they believe that his version of type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune concern, which they don't know what it's caused by, but they think it could be something as kind of benign as a chemical in a fragrance. They're just saying there's that much stuff out there that can throw certain people's bodies off. And this autoimmune issue, what it does is it causes the body to attack the pancreas and not produce insulin.
Yeah.
And so, that was kind of my journey.
Like they just don't know, like, if you just
exactly, because they don't know what's causing it. Which, like you're saying, which chemical. And I learned recently that they discovered the enzyme within certain people that if this enzyme is off in a certain way, I mean, I'm going to botch this explanation. Pollution from motor vehicles can cause lung cancer.
Yeah.
And they believe that this is the explanation of why certain people that don't smoke cigarettes and all that do get lung cancer. So again, I think that it's kind of scary when you really think about it, because probably everything out there is killing us. That we don't realize how artificial we live compared to hunter gatherers and the way that we evolved in nature.
Yeah, I mean, we create some other difficulty, because I mean, you living in nature, you could go drink from a stream that is contaminated with. It doesn't have to be something unnatural. Like it can be contaminated with a large number of
virus
metals
or bacteria,
and then there's heavy metals in the soil, and they get pulled up into plants. And that, again, that's not all our doing. The fluoride one is our doing. There's a couple of things that come into this. One is the whole idea of forced medication. Like this isn't like people get all up in arms about vaccines, but that's like actually for some type of disease, some type of thing that could harm you, like a contagion. This is like, oh, hey, we don't want people to get cavities, so let's add fluoride to the tap water. And I think there's a couple things that stayed out to me about that, though. One being that whenever I go to the dentist, they always tell me not to swallow the fluoride. Like, hey, the fluoride is bad for you. You look on your toothpaste tube, they say, don't swallow this fluoride toothpaste. And so it's just bizarre to me that the decision, or that it was like, hey, let's put it in the tap water, which we're drinking lots of. And obviously, it's not the same concentration as what you might swish with the dentist or that you put on your teeth with the toothpaste. But it's just conceptually, I think that is something we should probably look at a little bit more, especially because, as you pointed out, with personal susceptibility, individuals, like, let's say that from a healthy person or from most people, the low levels of fluoride that you get and won't accumulate. Your body is good at excreting them. But for some people, maybe their bodies aren't good at excreting that. Just like for some people, they this enzyme or whatever might affect their ability for their lungs to detox from air pollution. So it's, to me, it's like there could be individual susceptibilities, which aren't not individual from a like only this person, but just certain types of body types or whatever that, that are genome types that are more susceptible. So the other piece is, it's like, well, hold on, if the dentist tells me to swish it around in my mouth and that does the job, then again, why is the whole idea to drink it and actually to swallow it and so forth? So I don't know. Like, I recognize that. I think some people out there are like, oh yeah, the government's doing that to make people stupider. And there are other studies that show that the more fluoride you consume
might be working.
Yeah, I was gonna say there are studies that show that consuming more fluoride may lower IQ. But to me, I filter my water, and then made sure to do so, like with my kids and stuff like that. But it's just interesting to me how this is one of those scenarios where I don't think this is some kind of sinister conspiracy, but it's like the path of least resistance to solving some problem. Hey, let's put fluoride in the water. Not much different than when you buy salt, you see iodized salt. That means there's iodine in your salt. And that may be good for you, but it's just interesting, these path of least resistance, like, hey, let's just add this to this, and then we solve two problems with one. And it's like, well, hold up. Is this even the right way to go about it?
I think this is one of those where, these type of infrastructure plays in the country were put in place like middle 20th century. So, for example, you had a lot of poverty in this country prior to the 1960s and 70s.
And a lot of
yeah, that's what I'm mean. Like a lot of deep poverty. You had a lot of people in the Midwest and the South. And what happens is, I'm sure people weren't brushing their teeth every day, especially as, and having their kids brush their teeth regularly. So I think this was one of those things back in the 40s, and when all this stuff was kind of, remember the infrastructure of the country being built out with the New Deal.
Plumbing, indoor plumbing and all that. And,
exactly. And I think, it was probably a decision like, all right, if, to have enough people not walking around with teeth falling out and having other cascading problems from that, and having dentist offices filled up unnecessarily, maybe we just put enough fluoride in the water that it doesn't cause, additional harm, at least from what they knew at the time, and what they could study, and enough that
they think they're outsmarting the system,
and the dental hygiene will get better in the country, and that's just something.
Work, by the way, relatively. Like, again, we don't know if we're causing other problems, but the fluoridation of tap water has been seen as a success. In terms of limiting and reducing tooth decay,
but here I just want to say this too, because it's similar to vaccines, in my opinion.
But vaccines are.
Well, let me just finish my point. Well, let me just finish that. Vaccines, I'm talking about normal ones like tetanus, rabies. I'm not talking about COVID. I'm just saying the vaccines we've grown up taking. Generally, the mass population doesn't have a negative reaction to it. We know that there's small percentages of people, unfortunately, that do, like you said, maybe their body doesn't break certain things down and all that. But a decision's been made, by society that, if the rate of people is 1% or less that are getting hurt, that's unfortunate. But to keep everybody from, because we've seen the effects of measles and polio and these diseases spreading en masse. So to stop that, then we got to put up with this small portion of people getting hurt, unfortunately. And I think probably the same thing with fluoride, that, there's could be some of those negative effects, but at the time for the better effects, it was done. And maybe this is something, to your point, that as a society we should look at again.
Yeah, we should continue to look at all of these types of things, because
like with most people brushing teeth, do we need it?
Yeah, well, and our ability to measure gets better. That's type of the thing. Like, really, maybe, again, with you kind of insinuated, it wasn't something that we could see the adverse effects before. But if we start seeing the adverse effects now, we can actually measure it, then we probably should reconsider, because then the cost benefit changes. And so, but this is where you see the power of inertia. It's like, oh, well, we've been doing it like this as long as anybody can remember. And it's like, well, I'm not going to, we got enough stuff. We got enough new stuff to deal with it. I'm not going in and trying to open up old stuff. And so people will a lot of times disregard it just because of that. And again, this stuff isn't easy. This is where kind of the idea of individual liberty runs up against collective society. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do you make that decision on it? And again, I think you made a good point as far as how the vaccines, like, might be effective for 99%, but 1% are going to have a problem. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do then? And the same, like, that individual bodies sometimes just process things differently. So, but I do think it always that question when it comes to risk reward, is tooth decay enough of a risk to subject potentially that 1% or whatever the percent is, 5% of the population, to adverse effects for a forced medication for something that's not even contagious, more or less. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting question, but ultimately it's shocking to see. I mean, you see these headlines like, oh, pregnant people shouldn't drink tap water. And it's like, oh my God, where are we going with this? And that's probably an overreaction, but it definitely, I mean, my takeaway is just, please keep studying all this stuff. Don't just say because we've been doing it, like we can just keep doing things indefinitely, because that's just never a good reason to keep doing something. It's because you've always done it. But now I think we can wrap it from there. We appreciate Roy for joining us on this call out. Check out the next call out as well.